Welcome to Continuum's 14th episode of Press Play, our web series that dives deep into extraordinary works of contemporary music in both their performance and in informative conversation with the artists who create the work. My name is Joyce To. I am a percussionist, improviser, and a recent graduate from the University of Toronto Master's Program. I am thrilled to be joining Continuum as a host of Press Play this season. In this episode of Press Play, we feature a work for violin and glockenspiel titled In Memoriam Muhal Richard Abrams by American composer Tyshawn Sorey, performed by Carol Fujino and myself. Tyshawn Sorey is a multi-instrumentalist and composer who occupies a unique space between the worlds of spontaneous and formal composition. Recently named a 2018 United States Artist Fellow and a 2017 MacArthur Fellow, he is celebrated for his incomparable virtuosity, effortless mastery, and extraordinary ability to blend composition and improvisation in his work. Sorey has released 12 critically acclaimed recordings that feature his work as a composer, co-composer, improviser, multi-instrumentalist, and conceptualist. His latest release, Pillars, has been named as one of BBC Radio 3's Late Junction 2018 Albums of the Year. He is currently the Presidential Assistant Professor of Music at the University of Pennsylvania. This work you're about to hear is dedicated to one of Sorey's close mentors, Muhal Richard Abrams, who was a pianist, composer, educator, and founding president of the influential Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. Mr. Abrams, named a jazz master by the National Endowment for the Arts in 2010, was critically acclaimed for his depth and originality in his compositions and improvisations. And now I'd like to welcome Tyshawn Sorey.
All right, let's get started.
Okay, I only have some short questions. Well, I only have 3 questions.
Okay.
If you don't mind. So,
sure.
This piece must have been really important to you because it is dedicated to honoring the life of one of your close mentors, Muhal Richard Abrams.
Yes,
and now that you too are a mentor to lots of young aspiring musicians in your recent position at the University of Pennsylvania. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Could you speak more on your relationship with Mr. Abrams and how he has influenced the way in which you interact with your students?
Well, the thing with Muhal, it wasn't so much an academic situation that we were in. I mean, I met Muhal Richard Abrams probably around the year 2000. And I met him through a very close friend of mine at the time who was studying composition with him. And so what would happen sometimes is that Muhal and I, along with, our friend, we would all go on these long walks, particularly down in Central Park and a number of other places. Muhal Richard Abrams lived in Midtown Manhattan at the time that I got to know him. And so we would occasionally have these long walks. It wasn't very often, but every time we would have these long walks, I mean, you would talk about maybe kind of an all-day affair, being around Muhal because, there was just so much that he had to say, not only the way, in the world of music, whatever music they believe in doing, just finding their own path, essentially. And these were some of the kind of conversations that Muhal and I would have sometimes, just talking about how to, if they can't fit into a particular space, in music, how to establish their own space and how to establish their own practice and that kind of stuff. So we talked a lot about that, in during these walks. We would also talk about a lot of things concerning life, just in general, what it means to live life at a climate that doesn't necessarily always accept, whatever you do, whatever art you make, how to survive doing that, and for me, that was some of the most valuable advice that I couldn't have gotten. I mean, because he's lived through this stuff. I mean, all throughout the 50s into the 60s when he was establishing his own musical model, where his model has always been about not having any particular prejudice to any kind of style of music or anything of that sort, but to also be yourself and to accept yourself and put who you are into whatever the context of the musical situation is. Muhal has been very, very important to me in that regard. And as I said before, we would have these conversations, often like maybe 5-6 hours, just him walking these, who's in this doing this. And it's like, I mean, this guy has the youth of somebody who's like not even like who was beyond half my age. I mean, he just was so full of wisdom and positivity. And on a number of occasions, he's asked me to perform alongside him in a number of concerts that the AACM had hosted. He asked me to play a number of concerts with him and his groups that he formed, and each time was always, a very significant learning experience for me, not only, on a musical level, but also on the level of, what one does in musical situations, which is, which is to be empathetic towards anybody who you work with, and to, have a sense of trust from the very get-go, when you first start playing with people who you probably don't know. I mean, I think that was especially important to me, because anytime he would get together some of these ensembles, I didn't really know some of the other people who I would play with, but yet there was such a trust and love that was put into the music, from the very first note, to the point where I thought, well, if you don't have any kind of love, respect, or trust, anytime you enter the bandstand with another musician, you may as well not even play music. I mean, that kind of what led me to that assumption. I was just actually telling, like at last night's performance, I was actually talking about this, with Sasha and those folks over there. It's like, if you can't trust anybody on the bandstand from the first note, even if you don't know them, then what you're doing musically is not at all important to the situation. And every single note, everything you play has to be played with such fullness, to the point where the page doesn't even matter. Like where, the notes on the page don't even matter. It's not about notes. It's about really you can achieve, and and the people's ability to really hear that trust and to hear that love that's put into the music. So these are some of the most valuable things. You and the people who you work with are for the same experience. You're there to transcend what notes there are on the page and that kind of thing. You're there to do that together. You're there to do that as a group. I mean, and so at the end of the day, that's what you and your other musicians are there for. And if the two of you are not there for that, then it makes no sense. What happens as a result.
Yes.
And Muhal has taught me these lessons, so often, in our walks and during those performances. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So
no problem.
I actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I actually learned and performed this piece with Carol Fujino, the violinist, for this episode.
Excellent.
And so
cool.
while I was learning and performing this piece, I really felt that you were able to beautifully capture this harmonious cross between vulnerability, fragility, tenderness, while still having this sense of steadiness, this sense of trust that you've been talking about. And I read in a 2013 interview you did at the Miller Theatre that the piece was inspired by Mr. Abrams' piano exploration, Young at Heart. So I'm wondering, how did you come to construct the piece? And was there any reason that you chose to write it for violin and glockenspiel?
Well, for practical reasons, that was the only instrumentation I was asked to write for. And this was a commission. I forget who commissioned. I think Jenny Coe was the person who commissioned the piece. And it was a piece that was designed for me to participate as a performer in the piece. So I had to write a piece that I could perform on an instrument, but I didn't want it to be, because sometimes when I'm asked to write myself in the compositions, I'm asked to play drum set or something like that, something I'm known for doing. And I wanted to debunk that whole way of thinking and just say, I'm going to write for myself, but if I'm going to write for myself, I'm going to be playing an instrument other than drum set. which was glockenspiel, and I have an extended range glockenspiel that I play for this performance. Yeah. So it was exciting for me to compose a piece for that instrumentation, something that Jenny Coe and I could share the same kind of intimacy, that I'm talking about, when sharing the same kind of intimacy that I would share with Muhal. Like, I wanted to construct something like that for Jenny Coe and myself to participate in. And so we spend an awful lot of time rehearsing the piece. And because, as you said, there's a lot of fragility going on, but at the same time, there has to be a lot of trust with the interpretation. And also, it's quite difficult rhythmically speaking. I mean, there's a lot of things where it requires a particular type of exactness for both performers. One has to be aware of the sound of the glockenspiel and for how much time, the glockenspiel would ring or something like that. The violinist has to be aware of this and how that affects them, how it affects the interpretation. I wouldn't say psychologically, but maybe orally, how a person might, hear such things. So, it takes its time, but at the same time, it really requires a level of concentration and quite an extraordinary level of trust on the part of the two musicians playing it. At the end of the day, it's about the sound of the piece. It's not so much about the form or the construction or what have you. I mean, I could talk about the form and all of that all day long, but it's not really gonna resonate with others who don't necessarily think the same way I do about its construction. But what I will say is, harmonically, it definitely reminds me a lot of the blues, in a strong sense. And Muhal oftentimes talked about that, about how one can hear the blues in a lot of the music that he's playing, even though it's not necessarily, doesn't sound blues derived or something like that. It may have a completely different tone to it, but at the same time, you can hear the blues in a lot of what Muhal has done in some of his music. So, all to say that it's all connected. It's all connected to my mentorship with Muhal, as well as the understanding of, where he came from as a musician, and also where I come from as a musician, which is kind of a similar place, where all these different kinds of music that we've listened to are somehow connected, culturally speaking, or what have you. So the piece sort of tries to deal with these very same connections, through still harmony and through the use of motion, that's going on, particularly in the glockenspiel part, where it feels like, things are beginning to move quite a bit, but it kind of does it with this playfulness with the blues, along with the spatial qualities that are happening rhythmically over the course of the piece. So there's a lot there to talk about, but at the same time, I just wanted to highlight those very qualities as part of the thing. But it all came out of my relationship with Jenny Coe and the fabulous player that she is, and it just came out of the growing level of trust. And then the more we played that piece, the more we were able to kind of just maybe even do away with some of the metrical constraints or even durational constraints and just play it together as though we're making it up on the spot, or we kind of try to make it sound as spontaneous as possible. And it's not even an intention. It's just something that happened as a result of us playing this piece over and over and over again, to the point where it's not even about the notes and it's not even about the page anymore. It's about really each other and how we're interacting using that material,
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a really beautiful piece, and I'd never played with Carol before. It was my first time playing with her, and because of COVID, we rarely really got to practice. So it it was definitely like that. I did find that the process was similar to what you're describing. The more and more we played it, the more and more it just felt more like I don't need to look at the page. Like I don't
Right.
I can pause and we can feel into the next phrase. Um yeah, it's really you've this piece just really brings together two people in a really beautiful way, even if they don't know each other. So thank you.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. My
I,
pleasure.
I'm wary of the time. Do you have time for one more question?
One more quick question, yeah, because I have a quick office hour I got to do pretty soon. But yeah, what's
Okay.
the question?
It's just a quick question. So, you've engaged in your career as a jazz performer to a contemporary classical composer. What
Yes.
prompts you to write your music down, or like what prompts you to decide which aesthetic to explore?
It depends on the performers who I'm writing for. It also depends on what my interests are, what my compositional and so-called improvisational interests are, both as a spontaneous composer and as a formal composer. I would say that normally it would just, I just feel like I'm at a place now where I can just write whatever I want, just like a lot of people, who Muhal has trained, himself, and who have come up under Muhal, under the AACM. They felt like they can create a model of music that really exemplifies who they are as people and who they are as listeners. And so that to me has been my practice all along. I mean, this idea of mobility, to be able to write whatever music you want without feeling like you have to belong to a particular institution or a particular place. That's always been my attitude, just as a maker of music and as a writer of music. Um, but sometimes, I do ask questions to myself whenever I construct things. It's like, okay, what am I going to get out of writing this piece versus having a situation where I would spontaneously come up with something? I mean, there's arguments that could be made for both realms of practice. So sometimes I may feel like, a piece of music might be executed better if it were improvised. And so I would try to find a way to create to communicate to the musicians who I'm going to want to play the piece. I mean, because at the end, that's what notation is. It's communication. And if I want to, my idea of notation is to communicate as simply as possible whatever ideas you have or whatever sound you're hearing. It doesn't have to always be through Western music notation. It could be spread orally. It could be done graphically. I mean, there's so many different ways that I can explore this. So again, like I said, it depends on who I'm writing for. If I'm writing for people who may not necessarily have a strong background in reading music, and if I want to get a particular thing out of them, I know how to do it, and I'll be able to do it through words or through oral transmission or however I can do it to get my point across. So it can be written, but it can also be spontaneously created just by my imagination. And hopefully through the other musicians, the other collaborators, if they have imagination, they're welcome to bring as much of that to the table, as possible. Because after all, that's what music is about. It's about all of these different um, personalities that are I guess, transversing this idea of, what is notated, what is notation, and, what is composition, what is improvisation. Like, you just kind of get rid of those binaries, or whatever, like, where neither thing is necessarily privileged. But at the end of the day, all you're looking to do is communicate whatever you're hearing with the audience. And that's the most important thing to me.
Thank you so much. Wow, I feel
Thank
so
you.
honored to have been able to share space with you. Thank you so much.
It's absolutely my pleasure, Joyce. Really, really fun discussion. And I wish I had more time because I feel like we could talk all day about this stuff.
We can always connect, in the future. I'd love to hear more.
Certainly.
Thank you for watching episode 14 of Press Play. Thank you, Carol, for your artistry and beautiful playing, and thank you, Tyshawn, for sharing space with me. The next episode of Press Play broadcasts Thursday, October 14th at 7 p.m. with A Cry from an Indian Wife by Ian Kusan, sung by mezzo-soprano Marian Newman and accompanied by Rachel Kerr on piano. Visit our website www.continuummusic.ca to learn more about all our upcoming Press Play episodes and other projects. And to easily follow us on social media, sign up on our email list. And if you like what we are doing, click the support button and make a donation now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.